Funding for this program was made possible through the generous support of South Florida Water Management District, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Florida Department of Education, Dynamite Plant Food, an environmentally sustainable twice-a-year fertilizer designed to reduce nutrient runoff.
"22 million call it home. Millions more come here for recreation, beaches, and theme parks. Few know Florida is home to one of the greatest ecosystems on Earth, the Florida Everglades. While the Everglades can be seen as a vista on an airboat or helicopter tour, to really know the Everglades, one needs to get down at the water level and peer into the eyes of an alligator as it hunts. Watch a snake slither across the shallow marsh. Catch a glimpse of a panther stalking in the grass. Explore the flora and fauna of this spectacular place. Revel at the exquisite biodiversity, the wildly different rivers, swamps, estuaries, and reefs that are interconnected in a vast and complex masterpiece of nature. But this masterpiece has reached its limit to absorb mankind's ever-growing impact. For over 100 years, we have used this precious environment to feed our needs. Now, we have awakened. We recognize that the health of the greater Everglades ecosystem is critical to our survival. The most expensive environmental restoration project on Earth is underway. The entire infrastructure of canals, dikes, and water control structures is being re-engineered and will now protect the natural world in addition to humanity's needs. Industries, farmers, and residents are reducing releases of harmful nutrients. Many important steps in restoration have already become a reality. Can mankind achieve that delicate balance? Will the largest restoration plan ever attempted succeed? Join our team of scientists and explorers as they follow the flow of the great river of grass and beyond, as they unravel the challenges facing the Everglades. As in all growing nations, the vast wetland and coastal ecosystems of South Florida have been targeted by major transformations over the last century. These ecosystems have undergone countless changes to accommodate mankind's desire to expand his territory. The earliest pioneers in South Florida perceived the Everglades as a disease-ridden wasteland. Yet they were confident that if it could be drained, it would be a land of great opportunity and untold riches. Over the last century, settlers, developers, and governments built water control structures that allowed South Florida to grow and thrive. They controlled floods, enhanced farming opportunities, and created freshly drained land to support development. Unfortunately, those changes caused great damage to the Everglades. Progress during these times was beyond question. Completely unaware of environmental consequences, the wheels were set into motion that would forever alter the landscape. Only today, are we beginning to understand the irreversible nature of what we have created. Although government agencies, industry, and environmental groups may not always agree about how to save and restore balance to the Everglades, one thing is clear: humanity needs wetlands. They are the base of the pyramid that serves as a foundation for a fragile environment. And if places like the Florida Everglades disappeared tomorrow, dire changes would soon follow. In our last episode of Water's Journey, our team of adventurers began their travels at the headwaters of the greater Everglades ecosystem in the backyards of Florida's theme parks. Their goal: to examine America's largest restoration effort and the world's most expensive environmental cleanup. Tom Morris and Jill Heinerth launched a strenuous expedition through the Everglades waterways to get a first-hand look at the state of the natural world.
No.
Mark Clark and Wes Skiles chose a bird's-eye view to see how private, state, and federal partnerships have begun efforts to improve the health of the Everglades ecosystem.
You can really tell the difference between the Kissimmee Canal and the part that's restored.
As they trekked southward, they learned about how water managers are attempting to maintain the balance between protecting nature and providing the rising population with water supply and flood protection.
If we were to abandon this system at this particular point in time, there are literally millions of people that are living and working in areas that would not be habitable.
They learned that phosphorus seeping from urban developments and agriculture was causing catastrophic environmental changes. But they also met farmers and ranchers who were taking proactive steps to reduce the pollution leaving their farms. They traveled through Lake Okeechobee and discovered that the liquid heart of the Everglades was a fragile vessel leaching unhealthy phosphorus levels downstream. They also learned that restoring places like the Kissimmee River Basin can rejuvenate a damaged watershed.
These natural wetlands now filter the water again, and everything south of here will be healthier for it.
In stormwater treatment areas, they found promising evidence that native plants and organisms can be used to effectively clean water.
So you might call this our water treatment process for Mother Nature, because we intend to put this water back into her original Everglades to sustain it.
The team will travel south through the watershed to learn about how mankind's actions weave their effects through the landscape and all the way out to our estuaries and ocean environments. Wes and Mark join environmental scientist Fred Sklar on his monitoring rounds, visiting tree islands within the Everglades marsh.
So Fred, can you tell us a little bit about this map, where we are maybe, and what we're looking at here?
Okay, what you're looking at is Water Conservation Area 3A.
Tree islands are small teardrop strips in the marsh that rise slightly above water level. They represent the only dry landmass available to many varied species of wading birds, mammals, and plants.
The tree islands are critical habitat for many wildlife communities and also for a diversity of plant communities. And even though you can see on this image that the green might only represent 10% of the total Everglades, it represents more than 50% of the biodiversity of the Everglades.
And what that means is that tree islands are essential for the survival of a wide range of species. If we lose tree islands from the ecosystem, we're losing the habitat that half the plants and animals of the Everglades call home. For Fred, that's a call to action. His scientific investigations hope to bring attention to these seriously endangered biodiversity hotspots. Will the explosive growth of invasive and exotic species leave their future in peril, or will our well-intended restoration efforts subtly change water levels enough to drown these islands of Eden?
We need to understand how hydrology and water quality are affecting these tree islands. And the sooner we do that, the sooner we'll be on a healthy restoration path.
Fred's research, years in development, is keeping track of the subtle changes in soil creation and loss of these rapidly vanishing sites.
And year after year, coming back and dropping sets of pins to the soil surface so that we are at the soil surface. And if you can dig out this section right here.
Okay, so just cut
Yeah.
a piece that's all through here.
Yeah,
So just
cut down deep.
How about how deep?
That's good. You're doing fine.
All right.
Make a triangle. Put your knife underneath and lift it up. Okay.
There you go.
Now, does any of the sides have a feldspar marker on it? Let's see.
Soil is still being created in the Everglades. Fred shows Wes the amount of debris that has accumulated in this sample site since he dusted the location with a fine white mineral many years ago.
So 5 years ago, there was feldspar, this white material we laid on the surface, and so any kind of accumulation on top of that white layer has been what litter leaf fall has occurred.
That's correct. You have decomposition and you have accumulation. Dynamic balance keeps wetlands alive.
And without those wetlands, we don't have flora, we don't have fauna, we don't have the life that we're accustomed to here in the Everglades.
That's indeed very true. As you can see, it's more like the same depths as the surrounding marsh.
The thousands of wading birds that migrate to the Everglades every year depend on seasonal fluctuations in water levels, but they need the right amount of water at the right time.
If that nest and the surrounding habitat also gets too deep, then the parents can no longer forage because their beaks are only 6 inches or their legs are only a foot. If the water depth goes over a foot, it's too deep to feed the young and the young perish. So there is a dynamic hydrology interaction with tree islands that allows thousands of birds to recruit to the Everglades every year. We're trying to manage the system and we're trying to do restoration to maximize the number of egrets and herons and white ibis and glossy bills and roseate spoonbills, all using tree islands for nesting.
Well, our goal out here in the swamp over the next 2 to 3 days is to explore and document any impacts from this strong hurricane on
Biologist Mike Owen leads Jill and Tom on a survey of a little-known place people call North America's Amazon, the Fakahatchee Strand.
So this is one of the good impacts of a hurricane. Lots of water.
Yes,
Yeah, this place needs high water as much as it needs low water, doesn't it?
that's right. Wetlands need to fluctuate, high water and low water and everything in between.
Oh, man.
What have we here?
We have an alligator. This was a good-sized alligator here.
Oh.
Looks like the tail has been cut off.
Somebody's eating gator tail tonight.
Yes.
Poachers in the Florida
Well,
Everglades
without
will
the tail
often
off, I
kill
would say
gators
possibly.
just for the meat and skin
Sad,
found
you know,
in
I
the
mean,
tail.
People think that dead gators are good gators, but they're an important part of this ecosystem.
Definitely. Gators wallow and create little gator ponds, which are refugia for all kinds of freshwater fish and crayfish and shrimp during the dry time. So they're really a keystone species in the Everglades.
Although alligator meat from farms is a prized delicacy, poaching wild gators is illegal.
It's a fairly large
Protection
alligator.
efforts ensure that enough are left in the wild to fulfill their role at the top of the food chain.
Well, this is the Fakahatchee Strand's West Slough.
I like the looks of that straight ahead. Let's go that way.
All right.
Only a few years ago, the Fakahatchee Strand faced a major threat to its survival. The largest planned subdivision ever attempted on Earth, the Golden Gate Estates, was due to encroach on its territory and drain essential waters. With roads and homes already under construction, the state and federal government intervened. They purchased the land, halted development, and saved 55,000 acres of historic Everglades habitat. Miles of canals were backfilled to restore the natural sheet flow of water to the entire region. The newly preserved Picayune Strand State Forest is a glowing example of how the restoration plan has saved critical wetlands that were nearly lost.
Watch yourself on that.
Yeah, I'm real curious. I hope all those trees that the ghost orchids are on made it okay, being as they're so exceedingly rare.
Yeah.
Mike, we're coming up on this GPS mark.
Okay, that's great. We've got several ghost orchids up here that we've been monitoring for 12 years.
How many you got in this little population?
I know of 7 for sure, so hopefully they're all still there.
All right.
So, Mike, why do you call this the Amazon of Florida?
Well, because of all the water here in these sloughs in the Fakahatchee Strand, it tends to moderate the temperature and the humidity. And all that humidity saturates the air and elevates the dew point above freezing, so it keeps it frost-free. So it's like the tropics.
Frost-free.
So it's all due to a healthy water supply.
That's true. That's the reason the Strand has come back to approaching what it was. We're coming along the ghost orchid area. Here's the first one already. It's looking great. Yeah, that's where the seed started. Long root all the way up to here. Very healthy, shiny green growing tip.
That one's a beauty.
The ghost orchid, perhaps the rarest and most exotic orchid known. It exists in only 2 places on Earth. Its seeds carried to Florida by winds from tropical storms. Fewer than 300 ghost orchids have been found in Florida. Most here in the Fakahatchee Strand, documented by Mike Owen.
The ghost orchid for me is the holy grail of plants out here at Fakahatchee.
Well, I think we better be finding a place to set camp, Mike.
All right, you're looking for a shallow spot?
Yeah.
We might have a little company with us if we sleep right around here. These birds appear to be getting ready to go spend the night here.
I could work with this.
Tom put these up before.
Miles from dry land, the team sets camp to rest before venturing out again to explore the nocturnal life of the Strand.
We just hooked that to it, right? Okay. Wow. How's that?
Smarter than we look, anyway.
Second floor.
Second floor. Basement.
Hey, folks. I'm in. I hope you don't need me for anything else.
You're out.
Hey, this is going to work fine.
Oh. I caught it. Only went to there. I think it just came out of the hem. It's now been broken in.
The Fakahatchee Strand can only prosper with clean, low-nutrient water. The challenge, it must coexist with agriculture to the north. If farming disappears, the potential for an even more dangerous threat to natural places will come in the form of massive-scale development.
I think a farmer is one of the best environmentalists that exists in the United States. We deal with the environment every day. Sometimes she can be our best friend and sometimes she's our biggest enemy. But we deal with the environment, Mother Nature, and that's our business. And we better conserve the things that she has given us. And I think farmers do conserve.
Farmers like Chuck Oburn have taken on water quality and conservation as a personal issue. He's reserved almost half of his land for natural water treatment in a wetland marsh.
I think the alternative to agriculture is going to be pavement. We need some open space. We need to have a way to add water back to our aquifers, and the only way to do it is have open space such as farms. So we're conserving tremendous amounts of water. We're guesstimating right now anywhere from 20 to 40% conservation in water, which is very significant. We have done some studies on how much cleaning we're doing, and we're sending the water out cleaner than we're pumping it out of the ground.
In an effort to minimize discharge of phosphorus from his farm, Chuck Oburn has constructed a closed-loop irrigation system. A network of pumps, weirs, and canals allows water to be recycled continuously to irrigate crops. He has also invested in the creation of a compost that increases soil productivity, using yard wastes, manure, and a byproduct of recycled paper. Chuck's homegrown recipe is created from materials that were destined for landfills. This compost nourishes crops, holding moisture and nutrients at the root zone, thus minimizing phosphorus leaching into the Everglades.
Ag is something that's very dynamic. You change every year, you have new ideas, but hopefully in the end you incorporate new technology, new ideas to reduce your costs in the bottom line and hopefully help the environment. Over time, the kids will take over and I can watch the farm continue to prosper, and that's the idea. Now, if we mismanage our farm or mismanage the environment, I won't be able to do that. So we constantly have to be progressive in what we do.
It's farmers like Chuck Oburn, willing to invest in the future of farming and the environment, that hold one of the essential keys to the protection of the Florida Everglades.
Okay, so what's our plan?
Well, let's go see if we can see some eye shine. I know we should be able to see some spider eye shine, but you always have to be on the lookout for alligator eye shine, too.
All right. I just want to know who we're sharing this camp with.
Let's find out.
It's getting kind of deep over here.
Boy, it's a little harder to follow the
You know what? We can get
Snooze.
lost.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because your whole world kind of gets down to this little 50-foot radius, right? We're going more or less southwest, so let's keep that in mind.
Well, it's just tactile navigation.
Yeah, you do this all, you're semi-aquatic. Amphibious.
Oh, look at this here.
This is a Okefenokee fish-eating spider. And he'll actually dive underwater and catch and kill and eat fish.
You watching my back, Tom?
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Cutting a vine.
No, yes.
There we go.
That's why I was climbing milkweeds. Tough. They don't break.
All right, let's see. How do we go through here?
The arch to the western slope.
Yes, a little bit of a maze now.
The bugs like these hand lights we got, Jill.
Man. They're all over your face, your body. You're going to sleep with those tonight. Here, I'll help you out.
I feel like one of those beekeepers that has, lets bees mass all over them. Look at that. Midges. Yes. Maybe chironomids or something?
Or ephemeral. The ephemeroptera.
Yes. Wow. Look at that. You'll see some alligator eyes.
Yeah.
Ooh, through there. See that? Right through there?
Oh yeah. Look at that. There it is.
Something in the grass there.
And it's coming my way.
Careful, Tom.
What do we got? Oh, it's an alligator. Look at, there he is. I don't think he's letting us play with him like this.
Look at that. Where is he? Is he still coming towards me? Or is he,
oh, he's right here.
He's right here. Wow.
Let's see. Here's his head.
Oh, yeah. Look.
Look at him. Oh, he's a beauty.
Disturbed his sleep, Tom.
He's a beauty.
Boy, look, he just disappears in the weeds.
He does.
Right there.
Just
right
watch
there.
the movement of there he is.
Just gotta watch the eyes, eh?
Once they're down a couple inches, they feel pretty safe, and so they'll just
so.
freeze and sit there.
What do you think, Mike?
Is it about 6 or 7 feet?
Moving towards my ankles.
Here we go. I got her head. I got her head sighted. There we go. Look at that beauty.
Wow.
Nictitating membrane on the eyes.
Tom, you are 28 inches from its mouth. According to your
yeah. According to
yardstick.
my walking stick.
Where do the gators spend their nights?
Well, if it's a cold night, they're down in the water or burrow down in the mud. But on typical summer nights, they can be on land or in water.
Ah, so anything goes for us tonight.
Right, we're in between.
America is at war. Invaders are taking over our country, costing an alarming $123 billion a year. It's not man versus man, however. It's a war against invasive and exotic plants and animals.
Hey, look at that. Is that the Lygodium down there?
Yeah, that's a plant called Lygodium. It's actually an exotic species and finds its way up into the canopy and really changes the dynamics of fire in the landscape. It causes the fire to move from a ground fire up into the canopy. It really can be disastrous to a lot of these natural communities. In addition to its effects on fire, it can actually climb up into the branches, and its heft and weight actually breaks those branches and can break down that tree canopy.
Sometimes exotic plants and animals are accidentally introduced to an environment through increased globalization. But many problem plants and animals were brought in intentionally. The Australian Melaleuca tree was introduced in the early part of the century to help dry out the worthless swamp and transform it into useful timberland. Although 1 million acres has been removed over 20 years of eradication efforts, it is still scattered within 2 million acres of South Florida, causing great damage to the system. Released pets and non-native ornamental plants can also have detrimental effects on the global balance of nature. New invaders can shift the ecological balance by outcompeting local organisms and sometimes even completely destroy an ecosystem.
Ooh, Jill, here's a hot spot.
Next to clean water, fire is the key force for keeping natural habitats healthy. For thousands of years, fires ignited by lightning would provide an important catalyst for nourishing the soil, opening seed pods and culling thick undergrowth.
These fires are very important for the plant communities. They purify the plant communities, they keep out invasive species and other plants that don't belong here. And what comes back after it is tender and nutritious.
As urban society encroaches on the wilderness, Fires that threaten human life and property must be put out quickly.
But the Indians quickly learned that lighting these fires was good for the game. The early settlers did it, now the ecosystem managers.
Although they are vital for protecting habitat and developed properties, park rangers have a very limited capacity and budget to conduct prescribed fires. Without them, undergrowth and leaf litter can grow to dangerous levels. When arson or natural fires ignite, they can easily become dangerous wildfires that threaten everything in their path.
But now you understand a little better, you see how gentle these burns are.
Well, and that it's a really important part of this ecosystem, just as important as water.
Oh yeah. Behind water, I'd say fire is number 2. There's a nice flare up over there.
Look at that. That's going off. Weren't we just walking under that?
Yeah, I think you were standing underneath that a minute ago.
Look, Tom, it's getting kind of late. I think we should head out of here.
The tree you're hanging around is fixing to go up.
I know.
So that's probably
we know they burn
sign that we ought to get out of here, huh?
Yeah.
So this is Bonita Bay, and it's a group of sustainable developments. A nice idea that we need to see more of in Florida.
That's right. If development's going to happen, we really need to find better ways to minimize the impacts and maybe ameliorate some of the previous land use problems that were there on the site.
Just a decade ago, the natural water flow on this site was almost beyond repair, but responsible development has restored it to benefit an entire community. By constructing flowing waterways through the community, they have attracted wildlife and created stormwater treatment in a natural setting.
Let's take a look at some of the things they're doing here. This works in a variety of ways. Really, it's helped in flood protection. This flowway provides a nice corridor for wildlife, and it's an excellent amenity for the community.
It really is. They've really done a nice job here, and it benefits the wildlife, benefits water quality, and benefits the community. There's almost 1,000 people coming to Florida a day, and really growth's almost inevitable.
And when you get right down to it, it's all about stormwater and what's coming off of people's yards and going into our waterways and into the ground, into the aquifers. And when we look at it in that way, we can see that developers and homeowners have the ability to make a difference. Either they can make a big impact, which is bad on the environment, or like in this development, they can do great things that protect the entire ecosystem.
That's right. Stormwater is really the critical issue, and communities like this that address that really have a much lower impact on the environment.
But deed-restricted communities in Florida often mandate that their residents maintain a fertile green lawn, requiring the very same pollutants that are devastating the Everglades. By using native landscaping with limited turf grass and drought-tolerant plants, fewer resources like water and fertilizer are needed to maintain a beautiful yard.
Oh, look up ahead, Jill.
Oh.
Ooh, he's gonna be coming in real close to you.
Yes, he is. Get out of my way, Tom.
Give him some room.
I'm working on it.
Hey, let's pull over and put our snorkeling gear on. Maybe we can see him underwater.
That'd be pretty cool, actually.
Let's do it.
Alligators come up on land in the morning to bask in the sun's rays. As the day warms, they retreat to the water to prevent overheating. Then they bask in the late afternoon sun before returning to their sanctuary in the water overnight. Once reviled and feared, we now understand their importance to the ecosystem. They keep other species of animals in check by hunting them. They are here to be studied, watched, preserved, protected, and respected as survivors of the dinosaur age. One of the barriers for water flow are highways like the Tamiami Trail that traverse the Everglades. Water ponds on the north side of these barriers, while regions to the south are starved of needed water. Restoration goals include punching through or removing these types of barriers to return natural sheet flow.
Here we go, Tamiami Trail. Last obstruction before Florida Bay.
Bye, Tamiami.
It's kind of like doing the limbo to get through a place like this. You just kind of lay back in your paddle, let the cobwebs drape across your face, and go.
Well, there's a landmark, the Tamiami Trail.
Yeah.
Mangroves are important filters of materials that move between land and sea. They act like a giant strainer, catching runoff in their roots and preventing that runoff from getting to sensitive marine environments downstream.
How many people in the world have ever seen this, eh?
Within the matrix of roots, a variety of organisms thrive in a protected nursery ground. And this matrix also protects mankind by stabilizing the shoreline with a barrier that is resilient to hurricanes and storm surge.
We're getting it though.
Born and raised around Jacksonville.
As Tom and Jill head further south, the fluctuating tides transport salt water from the coast.
Set him on the run to the Everglades.
These brackish ecosystems are home to more than 70% of Florida's recreationally and commercially significant fish and crustaceans. Shellfish use them as spawning grounds, and migratory birds use them to rest and refuel. But they are in danger from mankind. Every day, critical coastal habitat is lost to development, degrading the same resources that make coastal communities desirable places to live. Jill and Tom sail across Florida Bay to swim in the estuaries near the Florida Keys. Within the mangrove fringe are many tidal cuts and islands teeming with life.
30 or 40 years ago, as a kid, I used to come down here to Florida Bay to fish and snorkel. But I've noticed now that things have changed. There are a lot more saltwater loving organisms here than there used to be.
Many organisms thrive in narrow margins of salinity. When unsuitable salinity causes seagrasses to die, their decomposing remains can cause a chain reaction resulting in algae blooms and poor water quality.
The fresh water that used to flow into the bay from the Everglades has been diminished and altered, both the amount and the timing. What goes on in Florida Bay is going to affect the health of the reef tract. It's the only coral reef in North America, and we've got to take care of the bay to take care of the reef.
Stormwater runoff carried to the sea by Florida's network of man-made canals adds to the stress on coastal wetlands. One of the principal goals of Everglades restoration focuses on undoing damage caused by the Central and South Florida flood control canals. It's all about getting the right amount of water at the right time in the right place. Projects like backfilling major canals are already underway. By keeping stormwater where it belongs, the health of estuary environments in Florida Bay will be greatly improved. Mangroves serve as the last line of defense for the marine environment.
For me, this was such an amazing day. I know not all areas of Florida Bay are this healthy, but here among the mangrove roots were tiny fish and crustaceans, and all the little babies that are protected here and get to grow up and populate the coral reefs and the oceans. What a beautiful experience to be able to swim through here and be able to photograph all these wonderful examples of life.
Although most people think the Everglades ecosystem ends on land, the flow of water extends far out into the ocean environment, where the impacts of land-based activities can be seen on one of America's most beautiful natural resources. As the largest living structures on the planet, coral reefs are among the most biologically diverse and beautiful ecosystems. These massive structures are formed by tiny animals that live in colonies. When they die, their skeletal remains provide a stony building block for the next generation, making these complex formations very ancient. As rainforests of the sea, coral reefs provide millions of people with sources of food, jobs, chemicals, and pharmaceuticals. They also play a generous part in Florida's $13 billion a year tourist industry. And when hurricanes threaten southern Florida, they act as physical barriers to catastrophic storm surges. Mark and Wes followed the path of phosphorus and other pollutants out to the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, where scientists are observing trouble in paradise. At first glance, the environment is stunning. But on closer examination, they find disturbing evidence of a system in decline.
Unfortunately, there is a lot of impacts that are occurring in the Keys. This is really what remains of an elkhorn coral that used to thrive and be the reef builder. As you can see, the actual living coral cover has been replaced by algae, which no longer allows for the coral polyps to recruit and maintain a viable coral reef. Let's take a look at what's going on over here. There's a lot of problems I'd like to show you.
Yeah, people just don't think there's pollution out here because the water's so clear. But the pollution doing the damage is invisible.
There's many natural factors that are affecting coral reefs. Clearly, we are part of the problem. This is an example of bleaching, which is related to climate change and increased water temperature on the reef. This is some damage to a fan coral, where you've got some algal growth and you've got some fungal communities here that are starting to attack the corals.
What is happening to this place?
One is climate change. 2 is physical damage, and the 3rd is disease, which is oftentimes linked to poor water quality. This is black band disease, which is a blue-green alga that has gone and killed the living coral. That's the white area, the dead coral. Around the edges is the live coral. This is red band disease, similar to black band, but another disease affecting corals in the Keys. Those nutrients are all coming from human activity based on land. They're coming from septic tanks and lawns and road runoff. And they find their way out here to the reef with the currents and the tides.
This looks like filamentous algae, Mark. What's causing it to grow?
In areas near shore, excess nutrients can actually smother a reef with this algal growth and totally kill the corals.
Oh man, it's really sad to see that happening out here.
Mark and Wes have an unusual meeting below the surface of the ocean. They are visiting the National Undersea Research Center Aquarius Habitat. This subsurface laboratory is the underwater equivalent of the International Space Station, hosting scientists for long-term missions to study the plight of coral reefs.
Permission to enter. Okay? Hang on, Mark. Let me show you the front door.
This is an amazing facility. I really wish they had this when I was doing research here in the Keys.
It's also an amazing artificial reef. Look at all the diversity of coral and fish here.
The whole structure is just alive.
Billy Causey is superintendent of the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. His job, to help safeguard America's only living coral barrier reef at the southernmost point of the South Florida ecosystem.
Thanks a lot. Did you make it up there? That's Mark. Mark, y'all know each other. Mark, hey, welcome to the
Aquarius Habitat is deployed 3.5 miles offshore at a depth of 60 feet. Scientists live in Aquarius during 10-day missions and use saturation diving to study and explore our coastal ocean. NASA astronauts also utilize the lab to practice techniques for use in space. 5,500 species occupy the 130-mile-long Florida Reef Tract, the third longest barrier reef on the planet. Although Mark and Wes will end their trip here, Jill and Tom follow the water to the Gulf Stream, where it will continue its journey without them.
Really one of those things that's hard to believe that all these areas we've been traveling actually have a connection all the way down here in the Florida Keys.
All the way through the Everglades agricultural area, all the way to Lake Okeechobee, and all the way through the Kissimmee chain of lakes. Every bit of it is connected, and we are downstream. We are at the receiving end of all the water that flows through that vast system.
What's our bearing?
I'm on a northeast heading for the open ocean.
There are many sources of pollution that reach our oceans, and close to half of the pollutants are attributed to stormwater runoff from land. It's a spiral of events. Increasing ocean temperatures are rising above coral survival range. Nutrient runoff allows algae to displace coral on the reef, and destruction of coastal mangroves eliminates places for coral juveniles to hide from predators.
If we lose our coral reefs, we're not only going to lose the most biologically diverse marine ecosystem on the planet, but we're also going to lose something that's very important to the economy of the globe. Protein comes from the ocean. So much of the protein that we eat comes from the ocean. Recreation, commercial activities, but also all the aesthetical values that coral reefs represent. Coral reefs are an indicator ecosystem, and if we lose them, we're going to start losing our oceans. If we lose our oceans, then we'll lose life as we know it today. What we know about this vast ecosystem is that we interrupted it years ago. Congress directed the U.S. Corps of Engineers to get the water out of the Everglades, to make it safe for people, to make it inhabitable for people, make it good for agriculture. We built 1,400 miles of canals that effectively gets rid of the water. 80% of the fresh water that we get every year is lost to tide through those canal systems. And now the natural environment and the built environment are deprived of a lot of fresh water that we need.
So do you have hope in what's going on? Do you think this Everglades restoration plan will make a difference?
I'm very hopeful for the health of and continued health of these coral reefs. Coral reefs have been around for 400 million years, and they're going to outlive us. And we as humans are a part of the ecosystem that affects coral reefs. The more we monitor the change, the more we understand about how they're changing, the more we will be able to adapt our activities to be less injurious to the coral reef or any coastal marine ecosystem.
So Mark, we've really kind of come full circle in your career, haven't we?
Yeah, it really is. 14 years ago, I started here in the Keys trying to understand the biology and the ecology of the reef system and understanding nutrient impacts. And as I studied here, I realized that the problem doesn't exist out here in the Keys. The symptoms exist out here. And many of the problems originate on land. And I really wanted to understand how to try to solve those problems. And so I've really been working my way upstream or up the watershed ever since, trying to figure out how do we actually deal with the sources of the contaminants and the pollutants and the hydrology that we really need to get right to protect things like the Florida Keys.
Okay, we're about 6 miles offshore now. There's about 600 feet of water below us.
Boy, I always get a funny feeling in my stomach when I know there's that much water underneath me.
Well, current's picking up, so we're into the Gulf Stream.
Well, this is fluorescein dye. As scientists, we use this stuff to track the flow of water through hydrologic systems.
Wow, it looks like a nebula.
Yeah, the stuff is very visual. It's going to allow us to actually see the movement of water.
You know, when you see this drifting off north, you can't deny that what we do on land ends up in the ocean, and once it's in the ocean, it's set loose on the world.
This dye is really going places. We're in the Gulf Stream, which is the largest river on Earth.
As it moves up the coast of the Americas, it's going to hit places like Scotland.
Well, Jill, our journey is over. But the water is still continuing on. Its journey never ends.
Marjorie Stoneman Douglas said it best. There must be progress. But we must ask ourselves what kind of progress we want and what price we want to pay for it. If we want to destroy everything beautiful in our world and contaminate the air we breathe and the water we drink, then we are in trouble. Since society has chosen growth as a mark of success, it must also recognize the expense to public health and the loss of precious ecosystems. Efforts to protect the planet's resources will only come through the acknowledgement that we are all part of the problem and that we must be part of the solution. It will take more than government programs to undo the ravages that we have inflicted upon the Everglades. It will require more than the action of dedicated leaders determined to help. It requires that each individual accept their role and is determined to do what is best, not for themselves, but for what is right for their children and future generations. Much has already been achieved without great compromise, but more can be done if we use our hearts to guide us into a future where man lives in harmony and balance with his environment. We are the guardians. Our ability to choose our path will ultimately define both who we are and the fate of the planet we live on.
To purchase this episode of Water's Journey, Everglades, Currents of Change, call 1-888-354-2376. Major funding for this program was made possible through the generous support of South Florida Water Management District, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Florida Department of Education, Dynamite Plant Food, an environmentally sustainable twice-a-year fertilizer designed to reduce nutrient runoff.